Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. Really quick, before we jump into today's episode, I just want to tell you about an exciting event that's coming up this weekend with Memory's Journey. Memory's Journey is a 12-hour Commander stream dedicated to raising money to support Alzheimer's research. As you might be aware, Alzheimer's is a disease that has impacted many families out there, including my own. So a huge thank you to Command the Cause, Commander-at-Arms, Deck Tuner, and Monarch for putting this together. 13 guests, including myself, are going to be joining this stream to help support this awesome cause. So make sure you tune into the stream on this Saturday, October 2nd. The stream starts at 11 a.m. Eastern Time and goes all the way to 11 p.m. Eastern Time, and it's going to include some of your favorite Magic content creators and Magic personalities. I'll be joining the stream to play a game of Commander at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time with Zach and Cal from Playing with Power and our host Jake. So make sure you check out that game and all the other ones in the entire event schedule you can find in the description below. Thank you in advance for joining us and supporting this awesome cause. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in from the Commander's Core studio. Welcome to the show. So before this episode gets started, one thing really quick. If you haven't seen my previous episode on Atraxa Praetor's Voice, Sagas on repeat, make sure you watch that one first. This episode is going over the Break the Bank version of that deck, and if you haven't seen that deck yet, well, this episode could be quite confusing. Regardless, both that episode and this one come to you courtesy of Garen, who's been supporting this channel as a Golden Pig tier patron. I truly couldn't do this without the support from amazing patrons like Garen, so again, Garen, thank you so much. Now, although I'm not going to go through everything that this deck does and wants to do, because I'm just going through the Break the Bank upgrades, I will give you a high-level version just as a reminder. So, Garen's personalized deck tech was built around Atraxa Praetor's Voice with a focus on Sagas. Essentially, it's a Saga tribal deck based on getting them out and getting their triggers to happen as often as possible and remove the counters to get these same effects over and over. And again, with Atraxa having at the beginning of your end step Proliferate, you can add additional counter to the Sagas that you want to get extra effects. And again, with this Break the Bank version of that deck, we've upped the budget to just around $100. So with all that said, let's jump into it. First up, there actually weren't too many Sagas that were out of our budget restriction, which was cards that are less than $1, but there were 3. And those 3 are some pretty fantastic ones with History of Benalia, Phyrexian Sculptors, and Cure Best the Sea God. For History of Benalia, the first and second lore counters are going to give us a 2/2 White Knight creature token with Vigilance. And then the third lore counter says Knights you control get +2/+1 until end of turn. So by controlling the number of lore counters on this, we can make a lot of Knights and then pump them when we're ready to. And then Phyrexian Sculptors says put a +1 counter up to 1 target creature. That creature becomes an artifact issue with other types. Its second lore counters destroy all non-artifact creatures, and its third lore counters exile all cards from all opponents' graveyards. So by controlling the number of counters on this, well, we can just keep wiping the board over and over again and keeping our commander safe. And then our third Saga is going to create an 8/8 blue Kraken creature token with Hexproof, tap all non-land permanents target opponent controls they don't tap during the controller's next untap step, and gain control target permanent opponent controls untap it. So yeah, some really powerful things going on there, and getting a lot of Krakens out and tapping things down and stealing things are all great. But what can be even better is getting multiple copies of our best Sagas. So we're also going to be running Mirror Maid and Estrid's Invocation. Mirror Maid says you may have it enter the battlefield as a copy of any artifact or enchantment on the battlefield. And then Estrid's Invocation is even better, so even though it's quite expensive, it's an incredible card in this deck that with our Break the Bank, we, well, needed to include it. It says you may have it enter the battlefield as a copy of any enchantment you control, except it gains at the beginning of your upkeep. You may exile this enchantment if you do return to the battlefield under its owner's control. Essentially, for this deck's purposes, this is a copy of whatever our favorite Saga is on the battlefield that can also just exile itself and come back as either that Saga or another one. Yeah, this is really good. And speaking of really good, how about Yorion Sky Nomad? When it enters the battlefield, we exile any number of other non-land permanents we own and control, and then return those cards to the battlefield at the beginning of the next end step. Basically, a fantastic, massive blink spell for our Sagas. And then we can also get our Sagas back in a different way, though, with Cosmic Intervention. It says if a permanent you control be put into a graveyard from the battlefield this turn, exile it instead, return to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. So whether someone has a massive board wipe, or we just get more lore counters on our Sagas and sacrifice them, we can get them all back with this. And speaking of board wipes, how about Cleansing Meditation? It says destroy all enchantments, threshold, instead destroy all enchantments and return to play all cards in your graveyard destroyed this way. So if we meet that threshold requirement of 7 or more cards in our graveyard, yeah, this can be amazing. wipe out all the enchantments, including our own, but we get ours back, so our sagas come back into play, refreshed, and ready to go, and with a lore counter on them, so we get all those triggers. And speaking of getting our sagas back, how about Open the Vaults? It's going to get everyone back all artifact and enchantment cards from all graveyards onto the battlefield under the owner's control. But a more specific version that can help us out even more is Eerie Ultimatum. It says return any number of permanent cards with different names from your graveyard to the battlefield. So yeah, in a game of Commander, essentially this is just, hey, get all those permanents from your graveyard back out on the battlefield. So yeah, that is a ton of value. And speaking of value, on top of the enchantresses that we already have in the deck, we're also going to run even more with Mesa Enchantress, Viridian Enchantress, and Setessan Champion. Each of these essentially say, whenever you cast an enchantment, draw a card. And Setessan Champion also gets a +1 counter on it as well, so yeah, this can become a big threat in no time, especially with our commander's ability to proliferate. Next up, we have two more enchantresses though that we're going to be adding in with Sithis Harvest Hand and Eidolon of Blossoms. Sithis says whenever you cast an enchantment spell, you gain 1 life and draw a card. And then Eidolon of Blossoms is even better in this deck. It has Constellation. Whenever it or another enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card. So this counts whenever our sagas are blinked or whenever we get them back with a mass recursion spell. Yeah, this can do a lot of work for us. And speaking of doing a lot of work, we can also save a lot of mana with Starfield Mystic and Herald of the Pantheon. Starfield Mystic says enchantment spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, and whenever enchantment control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you get a counter on it. And then Herald of the Pantheon also reduces the cost of our enchantments, and on top of that, whenever we cast an enchantment spell, we gain 1 life. But when it comes to value, we actually haven't gotten to the card that I believe adds the most value to this deck. And that actually isn't Trinket Mage, but it's going to be the first card I'm talking about because it can get us to that card. It says, when it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for an artifact card with converted mana cost 1 or less, reveal it, put it in your hand, then shelve your library. And that card is, of course, Hex Parasite. Hex Parasite has pay X and a Phyrexian Black, remove up to X counters from target permanent. For each counter move this way, Hex Parasite gets +1/+0 until end of turn. This is an absolutely incredible card at helping us control the number of counters on each of our sagas. So yeah, when we get Trinket Mage in play, we definitely want a tutor for this. Next up, we can also get even more counters on our sagas with Evolution Sage. It says whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, proliferate. And finally, with Hall of Heliod's Generosity, we can get our sagas back from our graveyard by paying 1 in white and tapping it. We put target enchantment card from our graveyard on top of our library. But now that we've talked about every single card that we're adding into this deck, let's very quickly go through the ones that we're taking out for them. And actually, really quick, just because a card is getting taken out does not mean that it is a bad card. It just means that the cards that we're adding in are adding more to the deck, and we had to take out cards to actually make this deck, well, legal in Commander. Regardless, now though, let's jump into those cards. So we're going to be taking out Ferropede, Jesai Heart of Oceans, Teferi's Time Twist, Blood Pact, Behold the Multiverse, Factor Fiction, Reign of Revelation, Painful Truths, Read the Bones, and Monastery Siege. And of course, this is just 10 of the 21 cards that we're taking out, so let's move on. We're also going to be taking out the Birth of Meltus, Timber that Calls the Dead, Aether Snap, Unwind, Slash the Ranks, Akaruma's Vengeance, Dance of the Mans, Triumphant Reckoning, Empowered Autogenerator, Harrow, and an Island. Again, these cards are not bad. There are just better options that we are adding into the deck. And now that we've talked about all the cards that we're adding in and all the cards that we were taking out, let's move on to the price. And like I mentioned before, with our upgraded budget, our deck is going to come in right around $100 at $101.36. And keep in mind that this includes the cost of our commander, which is quite expensive. And also keep in mind that this cost does include the cost of basic lands, so if you've got those already, you've already got some extra savings. And speaking of extra savings, if you use TCG Player and use Heavily Played and Damaged cards, you can save even more there. Because remember, Heavily Played and Damaged cards need a home too. But also keep in mind that this cost does not include the cost of shipping, which might vary depending upon where you live. And with that, the show is coming to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thanks again and have a good one.